Paralyzed CEO was alone with his birthday cake. A little girl saw and asked, "Can I sit with you?" Before we begin this beautiful story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this touched your heart, type Amen below. Your support means a lot to us. A wonderful blessing is on its way into your life. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the empty tables of Le Bernardin, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Marcus Sullivan sat motionless in his custom red wheelchair, staring at the birthday cake before him, a pathetic monument to how far his life had fallen. The golden 35 candles flickered mockingly, their wax slowly dripping onto the pristine white frosting like tears he refused to shed. The cake itself was a masterpiece of culinary art, 3 layers of Madagascar vanilla sponge with raspberry coulis and imported Belgian chocolate ganache, topped with delicate sugar flowers that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. It was the same cake he'd ordered for his 30th birthday celebration, when Sarah had surprised him with a party at their Hamptons estate. Back then, the cake had been surrounded by champagne flutes and laughter, cut with a silver knife, while hundreds of guests cheered. Tonight, it sat like a beautiful corpse on the mahogany table, untouched and unwanted. "Mr. Sullivan, shall I bring the check?" The waiter's voice cut through the oppressive silence, his tone carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying the kind of pity that made Marcus's jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. The young man, probably in his 20s, with the eager politeness of someone working his way through college, had been hovering at a respectful distance for the past hour, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before him. "Not yet," Marcus replied curtly, his deep voice carrying the authority that once commanded boardrooms filled with Harvard MBAs and billion-dollar deals. Even now, confined to this wheelchair, his voice could make grown men reconsider their positions. But tonight, that same voice felt hollow, echoing in the vast emptiness of his current existence like a stone dropped into a bottomless well. The restaurant had been cleared for him. A birthday gift from his assistant Margaret, who'd thought privacy would be kinder than the stares and whispered conversations that followed him everywhere now. Margaret had worked for him for 8 years, had seen him build his empire from a small tech startup to a multinational corporation worth billions. She'd also been there in the hospital, bringing him papers to sign when the doctors said he might never work again. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that Marcus Sullivan, the person, had died in that car accident, leaving behind only the shell of a man who happened to share his name. Marcus Sullivan, the youngest CEO in his company's history, the man who'd built an empire before 30, graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, dated supermodels and married socialites. That man now existed only in magazine archives and Wikipedia entries. In his place sat this broken version, wealthy beyond measure but poor in every way that mattered. The irony wasn't lost on him that he could buy this entire restaurant, could purchase 100 more just like it, but he couldn't buy back his legs. He couldn't buy back his old life. His phone buzzed against the mahogany table, the vibration unnaturally loud in the silence. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. His former fiancée, probably calling out of guilt or obligation, or perhaps because mutual friends had reminded her it was his birthday. Her photo smiled up at him, that radiant expression from their engagement party at the Plaza Hotel. He let the phone ring, watching her beautiful face disappear as the call went to voicemail. Sarah had left him 6 months after the accident, unable to handle what she'd carefully termed the new reality of their relationship. The 30-carat engagement ring he'd designed specifically for her now sat in a drawer in his Fifth Avenue penthouse, a reminder of everything he'd lost. The accident replayed in his mind like a broken record, as it did every night when sleep eluded him. The screech of brakes on the FDR drive, the sensation of weightlessness as his custom Lamborghini Huracan flipped 3 times before slamming into the concrete barrier. The terrible silence that followed when he realized he couldn't feel his legs, couldn't feel anything below his waist. The doctors at Mount Sinai had used clinical terms: complete spinal cord injury, T12 vertebra, permanent paralysis, no chance of recovery. But Marcus heard only one word echoing endlessly: never. Never walk again. Never run. Never feel complete as a man. His reflection stared back from the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park, now dark, except for scattered lights of late-evening joggers living the life he'd lost. He was still handsome in that sharp-featured way that had graced magazine covers: strong jawline, piercing green eyes, dark hair perfectly styled even now. His custom-tailored Armani suit, charcoal grey with subtle pinstripe, fit his torso perfectly, disguising the fact that his legs beneath the table were now just decoration. But his green eyes, once brilliant with ambition and confidence, now held a deadness that no amount of money could cure. The birthday cake sat untouched, its sweetness a mockery of the bitterness that had consumed his life like a cancer. His staff at Sullivan Enterprises had tried to maintain normalcy, sending extravagant flower arrangements, cards with carefully crafted messages, gift baskets filled with gourmet items he couldn't bring himself to enjoy. His mother had called from her estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, her voice bright with forced cheer, mentioning plans for Christmas at the family compound, pretending her son hadn't become a stranger to her. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering last year's birthday party in excruciating detail. 300 guests at his estate in the Hamptons, champagne flowing like water, a live orchestra playing on the terrace overlooking the Atlantic. Sarah radiant beside him in a silver gown, diamonds catching the light as they danced to their song. The contrast was so stark it physically hurt. Tonight, he dismissed his driver Harrison, wanting to feel some measure of independence, even if it meant struggling with the wheelchair and enduring a taxi driver's awkward attempts to help. The restaurant's ambiance, usually romantic and intimate with soft lighting and classical music, now felt like a beautiful prison. A string quartet recording played softly from hidden speakers, Pachelbel's Canon in D, the same piece that was supposed to play at his wedding to Sarah. The other tables, set with gleaming Christophilus silverware and fresh white orchids, awaited diners who would never come tonight. This entire space had been bought and paid for so Marcus could celebrate his birthday without becoming a spectacle. His watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's annual salaries, showed 8:47 p.m. Soon he'd return to his penthouse, to the silent rooms filled with adaptive equipment that reminded him daily of his limitations. The imported Italian marble floors that his wheelchair wheels now traced instead of his handmade Oxford shoes. The elevator he'd had installed at enormous expense, replacing the grand spiral staircase that had once been the centerpiece of his home. Marcus reached for his wine glass, a 1982 Chateau Latour that would normally bring him immense pleasure. The vintage was extraordinary, worth nearly $5,000 a bottle. Instead, it tasted like ash in his mouth. Everything did now. Food, wine, even the satisfaction of closing major deals had lost their flavor in this new reality where nothing could fill the void where his old self used to live. His company still ran smoothly. His executives were competent. His vision still guided major decisions from his corner office that had been carefully redesigned to accommodate his wheelchair. But the thrill was gone. Success felt hollow when you couldn't truly celebrate it, when every victory was overshadowed by the constant reminder of what you'd lost. The accident had taken more than his mobility. It had stolen his identity completely. Marcus Sullivan, The man who'd climbed mountains in Switzerland, run marathons in Boston and New York, conquered every goal he'd set for himself through sheer force of will, no longer existed. In his place sat this broken version, wealthy beyond imagination but spiritually bankrupt. As he sat in the oppressive quiet of the empty restaurant, surrounded by luxury that felt more like a gilded cage with each passing day, Marcus wondered if this was how the rest of his birthdays would unfold, alone, bitter, counting down the years until this meaningless existence finally ended. The candles on his cake burned lower, wax pooling on the pristine frosting like the tears he refused to shed. The staff moved quietly around the restaurant's perimeter, careful not to intrude on his private misery. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, millions of people living lives he could no longer imagine for himself. Marcus stared at the untouched cake, a symbol of celebration that had become a monument to his isolation. In this moment, surrounded by everything money could buy but devoid of everything that truly mattered, he had never felt more alone in his life. The soft chime of the restaurant's entrance bell barely registered in Marcus's consciousness as he continued his brooding contemplation of the untouched cake. The sound was so unexpected in the carefully orchestrated silence that he initially dismissed it as his imagination. Le Bernardin's massive oak doors, each weighing nearly 200 pounds, required significant effort to open. He assumed it was the manager, perhaps coming to check on his comfort, or another waiter approaching to refresh his wineglass with apologetic efficiency. The last thing he expected was the light patter of small feet approaching his table across the restaurant's pristine marble floors. "Excuse me, mister?" The voice was so completely unexpected, so utterly out of place in this temple of fine dining, that Marcus nearly knocked over his wineglass. His hand jerked involuntarily, sending the Chateau Latour sloshing dangerously close to the rim. He looked up to see a little girl standing beside his table, her golden hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier above like spun silk. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing a simple blue cotton dress that had clearly seen better days. The hem was frayed, and there was a small stain near the collar that looked like chocolate milk. Her white sneakers, once pristine, now bore the scuff marks and dirt stains of a child who spent time playing outside on concrete and asphalt rather than manicured lawns. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold, wide, brilliant blue, and filled with a mixture of curiosity and genuine concern that made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. Those eyes held an intelligence and awareness that seemed far beyond her years, as if she'd seen more of life's harsh realities than any child should. "I'm sorry, little one, but this restaurant is closed tonight," Marcus said gently, his voice automatically softening in the way adults spoke to children. He glanced around frantically, looking for accompanying adults, for parents or guardians who must be frantically searching for their missing child. The restaurant's security was typically flawless. Le Bernardin was the kind of establishment where reservations were made months in advance and every detail was orchestrated with military precision. The girl tilted her head, studying him with the unabashed directness that only children possessed, completely unburdened by adult concepts of social propriety or the careful dance of polite conversation. Her gaze traveled from his face to his wheelchair, then back to his eyes, without a trace of the discomfort or pity he'd grown accustomed to seeing in adult faces. "I know it's closed," she said matter-of-factly, her voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't quite place, perhaps Spanish or Portuguese. "I saw you through the window from my building across the street. You've been sitting here for a really long time, all by yourself with that big, beautiful birthday cake, and you look really, really sad. Like the saddest person I've ever seen. Can I sit with you?" The simple honesty of her observation hit Marcus like a physical blow. In his new reality, people either stared at him with carefully concealed pity or avoided looking at him altogether, their eyes sliding away as if his condition might be contagious. Business associates spoke to him with the careful tone reserved for the elderly or infirm. Even his closest remaining friends treated him like delicate porcelain that might shatter if handled too roughly. But this child's gaze held neither judgment nor discomfort, just pure, uncomplicated human recognition of another person's pain. It was the kind of honest acknowledgement he hadn't experienced since before the accident, when people saw him as Marcus Sullivan, the man, rather than Marcus Sullivan, the tragic figure. "How did you get in here?" he asked, deflecting her question while trying to spot any accompanying adults in the restaurant's shadows. The maitre d' was nowhere to be seen, and the few staff members visible moved quietly in the background, maintaining their professional distance. "The door wasn't locked," she said with a shrug, as if breaking into one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants was as simple as walking into a corner store. "I just turned the handle and walked in. The man at the front desk wasn't there. I think he went to the bathroom or something." She pointed at the cake with the kind of reverence children reserved for truly spectacular sweets. "Are those real birthday candles? Like with real wishes and everything? It's your birthday, and you're spending it all alone in this big empty restaurant?" "That's honestly the saddest thing I've ever seen in my whole life, and I've seen some pretty sad things." Her casual mention of having witnessed sadness made Marcus study her more carefully. There was something in her demeanor, a subtle weight to her words, that suggested this child had indeed experienced more than her share of life's difficulties. It was in the way she held herself, the careful way she observed her surroundings, the mature quality of her speech that spoke of someone who'd been forced to grow up faster than she should have. "My name's Grace," she announced, pulling out the chair across from him without waiting for invitation, her small hands gripping the heavy mahogany chair that probably weighed more than she did. "Grace Elena Rodriguez. I'm 7 3/4 years old. The 3/4 is really important because it means I'm almost 8, which is practically a grown-up. What's your name?" Despite himself, despite the walls he'd built around his heart over the past 2 years, Marcus found his lips quirking upwards slightly. There was something irresistibly charming about this child's matter-of-fact confidence, her complete lack of intimidation in the face of his obvious wealth and the opulent surroundings. "Marcus?" he replied, then added with a formality that matched hers, "Marcus Sullivan. It's nice to meet you, Miss Grace Elena Rodriguez." Nice to meet you too, Mr. Marcus Sullivan," Grace said formally, settling into the chair that was clearly designed for adults, her feet dangling several inches above the floor. "That's a really fancy name. It sounds like the kind of name that would be on a big building or in a newspaper. Are you famous?" Some people might know who I am," Marcus admitted, amused by her directness. In his previous life, such questions about his fame and wealth had been commonplace, but they'd always carried an undercurrent of calculation, people sizing up his net worth, his potential usefulness to their own ambitions. Grace's curiosity seemed genuinely innocent. "I run a company that makes computer software," he explained, simplifying for her young mind. "Like video games?" Grace asked, her eyes lighting up with the first real excitement he'd seen from her. "Not exactly," Marcus said, smiling despite himself. "More like the programs that help doctors keep track of patients or help schools organize their classes. Not nearly as fun as video games, I'm afraid." "That sounds important, though," Grace said seriously, her young face taking on an expression of thoughtful consideration. "My teacher at school is always saying the computer system is acting up and making her cranky. Maybe you could fix it." "Maybe I could," Marcus agreed, surprised to find himself enjoying this conversation more than any he'd had in months. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without carefully measuring their words, without treating him like broken glass or a source of potential profit? Grace kicked her legs from the oversized chair, her sneakers making soft thumping sounds against the leather upholstery. I live in the apartment building right across the street with my grandmother. We call her abuela because that's Spanish for grandmother. She's working late tonight. She cleans offices downtown in the big buildings where important people work, like maybe your building. So I was supposed to stay with Mrs. Chen on the 3rd floor of our building. But Mrs. Chen had to go to the hospital really fast because her husband fell down the stairs and hurt himself really bad. Marcus felt alarm bells ringing in his mind. The casual way she mentioned being unsupervised, the matter-of-fact tone she used to describe what sounded like a precarious living situation, triggered protective instincts he'd forgotten he still possessed. This was clearly a child who'd been forced to become self-sufficient at an age when she should have been worried about nothing more serious than homework and playground politics. So you're alone right now? Grace, you can't just wander around the city by yourself, especially at night. New York can be dangerous, even for adults. Grace waved dismissively, her small hand cutting through the air with surprising authority. I'm not wandering around like some lost little kid. I was in our apartment doing my homework, math problems that are super boring. When I looked out the window to take a break, that's when I saw you through this big window here. She gestured toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the street. You've been sitting alone for almost 2 hours. I counted because I was curious. And you haven't eaten even one bite of your cake, which seems like a terrible waste because it looks absolutely delicious and probably costs more than my abuela spends on groceries in a whole month. Grace, before we continue talking, I need to make sure you're safe, Marcus said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd perfected in countless business negotiations where millions of dollars hung in the balance. What's your grandmother's phone number? I should call her right now and let her know where you are. She's probably worried sick. Grace's expression grew complicated, a flicker of something, fear, uncertainty, shame, crossing her young features like a shadow passing over sunlight. Her hands, which had been confidently gesturing moments before, now twisted nervously in her lap, and she looked down at the pristine white tablecloth as if it held answers to questions she didn't want to face. She doesn't have a phone right now, Grace said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. It got turned off last month. The phone company said she didn't pay the bill, but she was trying really hard to get the money together. She's working extra shifts to save up for a new one, but it costs a lot of money, and we have other bills that are more important, like rent and food, and my school supplies. The admission hit Marcus harder than he'd expected, like a punch to the stomach that left him winded and struggling for breath. This child, who'd approached him with such confidence and wisdom, who'd spoken with the poise of someone much older, was clearly dealing with her own difficult circumstances that made his own problems seem suddenly trivial and self-indulgent. The casual way she mentioned the phone being disconnected, the matter-of-fact tone she used to discuss what was obviously severe financial hardship, painted a picture of poverty that stood in stark, almost obscene contrast to the opulent restaurant where they sat. Grace, Marcus said carefully, his voice gentle but insistent, the same tone he'd used in delicate business negotiations where one wrong word could destroy months of careful planning. Does your grandmother know you left the building tonight? Not exactly, Grace repeated, her voice growing even smaller now, though she maintained the direct eye contact that suggested she wasn't trying to deceive him. Her honesty was both refreshing and heartbreaking. A child who'd learned that truth, however painful, was safer than lies. She left for work before I got home from school today, and she won't be back until really, really late, like 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes even later if they need her to work extra buildings. She works 2 jobs, sometimes 3, when she can find extra cleaning work or when one of the rich ladies needs help with alterations. Mrs. Chen was supposed to watch me and help me with my homework, but she had to leave so fast for the hospital when her husband got hurt that she forgot about me completely. Marcus felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. An emotion he'd thought buried along with his old life, his old sense of purpose. Here was a 7-year-old child, essentially raising herself while her grandmother worked multiple jobs just to survive, to keep a roof over their heads and food on their table. Meanwhile, he'd been sitting here wallowing in self-pity despite having more money than he could spend in several lifetimes, despite having every material comfort and luxury that money could buy. "How often are you left alone like this?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer from the way Grace had spoken so casually about taking care of herself, about being responsible and independent in ways that no child should have to be. "Just sometimes when Abuela has to work extra shifts," Grace said defensively, her chin rising with the kind of protective loyalty that children showed toward the adults they loved, even when those adults were struggling to provide the care and attention they deserved. "It's not her fault. She works really, really hard to take care of both of us. She cleans offices at night in the big buildings downtown, where all the important business people work during the day. Then she comes home and sleeps for just a few hours before going to do laundry and alterations for the rich ladies on the Upper East Side, who have more clothes than they know what to do with. Sometimes she gets so tired she falls asleep sitting up at the kitchen table, still holding her sewing needle." The picture she painted broke Marcus's heart completely. This 7-year-old was not only caring for herself, but was mature enough to understand and defend her grandmother's impossible situation, to see the sacrifices being made on her behalf, and to appreciate them rather than resent them. Meanwhile, he had a staff of people whose only job was to make his life easier. Housekeepers who maintained his penthouse, assistants who managed his schedule, drivers who transported him wherever he needed to go, cooks who prepared his meals, personal trainers who helped him maintain his physical health, therapists who worked to improve his mental state. "Your grandmother sounds like an amazing, incredibly strong woman," Marcus said gently, meaning every single word. The respect in his voice was genuine. He'd built a business empire, but this woman was raising a child alone while working multiple jobs and still managing to instill such wisdom and kindness in her granddaughter. But 7-year-olds shouldn't have to take care of themselves, no matter how capable and smart they are. It's not fair to you, and it's not safe. Grace studied his face intently, her blue eyes searching his expression as if trying to determine his true intentions, to assess whether he represented a threat to the fragile stability she and her grandmother had managed to create. "You're not going to call the police or social services, are you?" "Because Abuela and I are doing just fine together. She loves me so much, and I love her, and I don't want anyone to think she's not a good grandmother because she is. She's the best grandmother in the whole entire world, and she tells me every day how proud she is of me and how much she loves me, and she works so hard to make sure I have everything I need." The panic in her voice, the way her small hands gripped the edge of the table as if preparing to flee, made Marcus's chest tighten with emotion. This child was living in constant fear that the one person she had left in the world might be taken away from her, because of circumstances completely beyond their control, because poverty was somehow seen as a moral failing rather than a systemic problem. "No, sweetheart," Marcus said immediately, his voice firm and reassuring, the same tone he'd used to calm nervous investors during market crashes. "I'm not going to call anyone. I can tell your grandmother loves you very much, and I would never do anything to separate you from her." But I am worried about you being alone so much, especially at night in a city like New York." Relief flooded Grace's features like sunlight breaking through storm clouds after a terrible storm. Her shoulders relaxed, and she released her death grip on the table edge, her breathing returning to normal as the immediate threat passed. Good. Because if they took me away from Abuela, it would break her heart into a million pieces, and mine too. She already lost so much when my parents died. She can't lose me too. The weight of her words settled between them like a heavy blanket. Marcus felt compelled to ask the question that was forming in his mind, though he dreaded the answer and wasn't sure he was prepared to hear about more tragedy in this child's short life. "Grace, what happened to your parents?" "Car accident," Grace said simply, her voice taking on the matter-of-fact tone that children used when discussing trauma they'd been forced to accept and live with when they'd had to develop coping mechanisms that no child should need. "I was 4 years old when it happened. I don't remember them very much anymore, just little pieces, like puzzle pieces that don't quite fit together. My mama's laugh, the way my papa used to lift me up high in the air, the smell of my mama's perfume. But Abuela has lots of pictures of them, and she tells me stories about them all the time, so I won't forget who they were or how much they loved me." The parallel to his own accident wasn't lost on Marcus. While he'd lost his mobility and his old life, his sense of identity and purpose, Grace had lost her entire family structure, her security, her childhood innocence. She'd been forced to grow up too fast, to become resilient in ways that no 4-year-old should have to be. Yet here she was, offering comfort to a stranger because she recognized pain in another person and felt compelled to help because her grandmother had taught her that helping others was one of the most important things you could do in life. "I'm so sorry, Grace," Marcus said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "That must have been incredibly difficult and scary." "It was really sad for a long time," Grace acknowledged, her young voice carrying a wisdom that no child should possess, an understanding of loss and grief that came from lived experience rather than imagination. "But Abuela says my mama and papa are watching over me from heaven, and that they sent me to her because we both needed someone to love. She says love multiplies when you share it, instead of getting smaller like money does when you spend it. The more love you give away, the more you have inside your heart." The wisdom in her words, clearly passed down from her grandmother, humbled Marcus completely. This child had faced unimaginable loss, the kind of tragedy that would devastate most adults, yet somehow had retained an open heart capable of reaching out to comfort others. She understood concepts about love and resilience and the true meaning of wealth that he, despite all his education and business success, was only beginning to grasp. "Your grandmother is very wise," Marcus said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "And you're incredibly brave and strong." Grace beamed at the praise, her face lighting up with the kind of pure joy that only children possessed when they received recognition for something they valued. "She is the wisest person in the whole world. She knows so many things, like how to make the most delicious empanadas that smell like heaven when they're cooking, and how to get any kind of stain out of anything, and how to fix broken things with just needle and thread, and how to make people feel better when they're really sad or scared or lonely. Is that what you're doing now? Trying to make me feel better?" "Maybe a little," Grace admitted with the honesty that characterized all her responses. "But also, I really wanted to know why someone would have a birthday party all by themselves in such a fancy place. Don't you have any friends or family who wanted to celebrate with you?" The question was innocent but devastating in its accuracy. Marcus realized with painful clarity that he'd surrounded himself with business associates and social acquaintances, people who were attracted to his wealth and status rather than genuine connections. True friends. People who cared about him as a person rather than as a networking opportunity. The answer was painfully, embarrassingly clear. As they shared cake and continued talking, Marcus noticed Grace occasionally wincing when she thought he wasn't looking, and the way she kept glancing fearfully toward the windows, as if watching for someone she desperately didn't want to see. Marcus watched Grace's face transform from joy to worry in a matter of seconds, her blue eyes fixed on something beyond the restaurant's windows. Her small body had gone tense, the fork pausing halfway to her mouth as she stared into the darkness outside. The change was so dramatic that Marcus felt his own heart rate spike in response to her obvious concern. "Grace, what's wrong?" Marcus asked gently, following her gaze toward the windows but seeing nothing unusual, just normal street traffic and a few pedestrians hurrying by in the evening light. "What are you looking at?" I should probably go," Grace said quietly, pushing back from the table with obvious reluctance. The confident little girl who had been entertaining him with stories looked genuinely worried now. "Carlos might be coming home from work early, and he gets really grumpy when I'm not where I'm supposed to be." "Who's Carlos?" Marcus asked, sensing there was more to this story. Grace's expression grew complicated as she fidgeted with her napkin. "My abuela's friend. He's been staying with us for a while because he lost his job and needed a place to live. Abuela felt sorry for him because they've known each other since they were kids back in Puerto Rico." The way Grace's voice changed when she mentioned Carlos made Marcus pay closer attention. "And you don't like him very much?" "He doesn't like me very much," Grace said matter-of-factly, but Marcus could hear the hurt underlying her practical tone. "He says kids are too noisy and too expensive, and that I ask too many questions. When I try to talk to him, he just tells me to go away, or to be quiet. Sometimes he acts like he wishes I wasn't there at all." Marcus felt a protective surge go through him. While this wasn't physical danger, he recognized the emotional damage that could come from a child feeling unwanted in their own home. "Grace, how does your grandmother feel about the way Carlos treats you?" "Abuela doesn't really see it," Grace said, carefully choosing her words. "Carlos is nice to her, and he helps pay for some of our bills when he has money from odd jobs. When Abuela is around, he mostly just ignores me, which is actually better than when he's grumpy. But when it's just me and him—" She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "What happens when it's just you and him?" Marcus asked gently. "He tells me I'm a burden, that I cost too much money, that I eat too much food and make too much noise," Grace said quietly. "He says Abuela would be better off without having to take care of a kid. Sometimes he talks about my papa in a really mean way, saying my papa was a troublemaker who should have minded his own business." Marcus felt anger building inside him, not at physical abuse, but at the emotional cruelty being inflicted on this remarkable child. "Grace, Carlos is wrong about everything he's saying to you. You are not a burden, and your grandmother clearly loves you very much." Grace's eyes brightened slightly at his words. "I know Abuela loves me. She tells me every day. But it's hard when Carlos makes me feel like I'm causing problems just by existing. And I don't understand why he says bad things about my papa. Papa was a police officer who helped people." Something about Grace's mention of her father being a police officer made Marcus's protective instincts sharpen. "Grace, does Carlos seem to know things about your father? Like, did they know each other?" "I think maybe they did," Grace said, her young face scrunching up in concentration. "Sometimes Carlos looks familiar, like maybe I've seen him before, but I can't remember where. When he gets really grumpy, he says things about Papa that make it sound like he knew him personally. But I was only 4 when Papa died, so my memories are all mixed up." Marcus filed this information away for later investigation. There was something significant about the connection between Carlos and Grace's father, but he didn't want to upset Grace by pushing too hard for details. "Grace, where does Carlos work now?" Marcus asked, his mind already beginning to formulate plans. He doesn't really have a steady job, Grace said, with the matter-of-fact tone of a child who'd learned to accept adult circumstances she couldn't control. Sometimes he does security work when his friend calls him, but mostly he just stays home watching TV while Abuela and I are at school and work. And he complains that it's hard to find good work, but Abuela works all the time, and she's from the same place he is. The picture Grace painted was becoming clearer. Carlos was essentially freeloading off her grandmother's hard work while making Grace feel unwelcome in her own home. It wasn't physical abuse, but the emotional toll on a 7-year-old who'd already lost her parents was significant. Marcus pulled out his phone and quickly programmed his number. "Grace, I want you to know that you can call me if you ever feel scared or alone," he said, writing down his number. "I want you to memorize this. If you ever need someone to talk to, or if Carlos makes you feel really bad about yourself, you call me." Grace looked at the paper with wonder. "You would really want me to call you, even though I'm just a kid and you're important and busy?" "Grace, you are one of the most important people I've met in years," Marcus said with complete sincerity. "You helped me when I was feeling lost and alone. If you'll let me, I'd like to be someone you can count on too." Grace smiled, the first genuine smile since she'd spotted whatever had worried her outside. "I would like that a lot. But what if Carlos gets mad that I have a grown-up friend? He says kids shouldn't bother adults with their problems." Carlos is wrong about that too," Marcus said firmly. "Adults should want to help kids, especially smart, kind kids like you. Grace, would it help if I could find a way for your grandmother to not need Carlos's help with money anymore?" Grace's eyes widened with hope, but she was clearly trying not to get too excited. "You would do that? But how?" Marcus was already formulating a plan. His company did business with cleaning services, security firms, property management companies. He could find Grace's grandmother steady, well-paying work that would eliminate their dependence on Carlos entirely. "Grace, I have a lot of connections in business," Marcus explained. "I might be able to help your grandmother get a better job, one that pays enough that she wouldn't need Carlos to help with bills. And if she had a better job, maybe you two could get your own apartment, just for the two of you." "Just me and Abuela?" Grace asked, her voice filled with longing. "No more walking on eggshells around Carlos? No more being told I'm too loud or too expensive? Just you and your grandmother," Marcus confirmed. "You could be a normal kid who talks as much as she wants and asks as many questions as she wants." Grace was quiet for a moment, processing this possibility. "Mr. Marcus, why would you want to help us? You have your own problems to worry about." "But because, Grace, meeting you tonight reminded me that helping people is one of the most important things we can do," Marcus said honestly. "And because every kid deserves to feel welcome and loved in their own home." As they talked more, Marcus began working out the details of his plan. He could approach Empire Cleaning Services about expanding their contracts, specifically requiring Elena Rodriguez for a supervisory position. He could arrange better housing through legitimate channels. Most importantly, he could give Grace and her grandmother the financial independence to choose who they wanted in their lives. "Grace, I need you to go home now, but I want you to be careful about what you tell Carlos," Marcus said seriously. "Don't mention meeting me or being in this restaurant. If he asks where you've been, stick to your story about helping Mrs. Chen with her husband's emergency." Grace nodded solemnly. "What if he asks more questions?" "Keep your answers simple and don't volunteer extra information," Marcus advised. "And Grace, if Carlos is especially grumpy tonight, just remember that this situation is temporary. I'm going to start making phone calls tomorrow to help your grandmother find better opportunities." Marcus pulled out his wallet and extracted several $100 bills. "Grace, I want you to take this and hide it somewhere. Carlos will never find it," he said, pressing the money into her small hands. Don't tell your grandmother about it yet. Just keep it as emergency money. Can you find a good hiding place?" Grace stared at the money with wide eyes. "This is so much money, Mr. Marcus. Are you sure you want to give it to me?" "I'm absolutely sure," Marcus said firmly. "And Grace, this is just the beginning. I'm going to help you and your grandmother build a life where you never have to feel unwanted or unwelcome again." Grace carefully folded the bills and tucked them into her shoe where they would be hidden but accessible. "Will I see you again soon?" "Very soon," Marcus promised. "Tomorrow, I'm going to start making arrangements. By this weekend, I hope to have some really good news for you and your grandmother." As Grace walked toward the restaurant's entrance, she turned back one more time. "Mr. Marcus, thank you for listening to me and for believing that I deserve better. Carlos always makes me feel like I'm being dramatic or asking for too much." "You're not dramatic, and you're not asking for too much," Marcus said firmly. "Every child deserves to feel valued and loved." Watching her small figure disappear into the New York night, Marcus felt a transformation beginning inside himself. For the first time since his accident, he had a purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices. He had someone to help, someone who needed not just his money, but his genuine care and attention. Marcus immediately called his head of security, David Chen. "David, I need you to do some discreet research on a man named Carlos, who's been staying with a family named Rodriguez. The grandmother works nights cleaning offices downtown, and I need to know everything about this Carlos, his background, employment history, any connection to law enforcement." "Marcus, what's this about?" David asked, his voice sharpening with professional interest. "A 7-year-old girl who's being emotionally mistreated by someone who should be protecting her," Marcus said grimly. "And David, I have a feeling there's more to this Carlos than meets the eye." "I'll have a full report by tomorrow morning," David promised. As Marcus waited for his driver, he was already planning. Tomorrow, his life would begin again, not as the man he used to be, but as someone better, someone who used his power and resources to make sure kids like Grace felt valued and loved. The rain that had started falling seemed to wash away the last remnants of his old, self-pitying existence. Grace had given him more than friendship. She'd given him a reason to live again. Now it was time to make sure she got the childhood she deserved. As his car pulled away from the restaurant, Marcus felt more energized and purposeful than he had since before his accident. Tomorrow, he would start building the most important business plan of his life, a plan to give Grace Rodriguez and her grandmother the independence and security they needed to build a happy life together. By Monday, if everything went according to plan, Grace would never again have to feel like she was a burden or an inconvenience. She would finally be free to be the remarkable, curious, caring child she was meant to be. Marcus spent a sleepless night in his Fifth Avenue penthouse, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. By 5 a.m., he was already making phone calls, using the early hour to reach West Coast contacts and international associates. The view from his windows showed Central Park awakening to another day, but Marcus's attention was entirely focused on the task at hand. At exactly 8 a.m., David Chen arrived with a thick file and a grim expression. "Marcus, you're going to find this interesting," David said, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. Carlos Mendoza, age 42, former security guard with a spotty employment record and a history of being let go for attitude problems and conflicts with supervisors. Marcus leaned forward, his instincts telling him there was more to this story. "Tell me about his employment history." Here's where it gets interesting," David continued, opening the file. 3 years ago, Mendoza was working security at the Meridian building downtown, the same building where Officer Carlos Rodriguez was conducting a major drug investigation. When the investigation concluded and several people were arrested, Mendoza and several other security guards were fired for negligence and failure to report suspicious activities. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Carlos Rodriguez. That's Grace's father's name. Exactly. Officer Carlos Rodriguez was Grace's father, and he was the lead investigator on a case that exposed a drug operation running out of that building. When the operation was shut down, a lot of people lost their jobs, including security personnel who should have been reporting the suspicious activity but weren't. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, so Mendoza lost his job because of Grace's father's investigation. It appears so, and Marcus, there's more. According to my sources, Mendoza has been unemployed or underemployed ever since, moving from one temporary security job to another. He's also been known to blame Officer Rodriguez publicly for ruining his career by being an overzealous cop who should have minded his own business. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. Grace wasn't just being emotionally mistreated by a random man. She was being targeted by someone who blamed her heroic father for his own professional failures. David, this man is taking out his resentment on an innocent child whose father was just doing his job. There's more, David said, flipping to another page. Elena Rodriguez is Officer Rodriguez's mother. She took Grace in after the car accident that killed Grace's parents. I don't think Elena knows about Mendoza's connection to her son's work or his resentment toward the family. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. I need you to put discreet surveillance on that building. If Mendoza realizes someone is taking an interest in Grace's situation, I want to know about it immediately. While David arranged for surveillance, Marcus called his assistant Margaret, who arrived within the hour with her laptop and a thermos of coffee. Margaret, I need you to research Empire Cleaning Services, the company that employs Elena Rodriguez. I want to know everything about their business, their contracts, their financial situation, and any opportunities for legitimate expansion. Margaret raised an eyebrow, but began typing immediately. Are we looking at a potential acquisition? We're looking at creating opportunities, Marcus said carefully. I need you to research upcoming city contracts for cleaning services, particularly any bids that a small company like Empire could compete for with the right backing and resources. By 10 a.m., Margaret had worked her magic. I found something perfect, she announced. The city is putting out bids next month for cleaning services for the new municipal complex downtown. It's a 3-year contract worth several $1 million, but most small companies can't compete because they don't have the bonding requirements and insurance coverage. However, if a company had a strategic partner who could provide backing. Marcus smiled. Set up a meeting with James Morrison, Empire's owner, for this afternoon. Tell him we're a consulting firm that helps small businesses compete for large government contracts. While Margaret arranged the meeting, Marcus called Jennifer, Sarah's old friend, who ran a high-end property management company. Jennifer, it's Marcus Sullivan. I need your help with something important. Marcus, what can I do for you? I need you to find a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools, available within the next week, Marcus said. I also need you to set up a legitimate rental assistance program through your company, something that would help working families afford better housing. That's very specific, Jennifer said carefully. Are we talking about a corporate housing situation? We're talking about helping a hard-working family improve their living situation, Marcus replied. Can you make it happen? Absolutely. I actually think it's a wonderful idea for a rental assistance program. It could help a lot of families. By noon, Marcus had the framework of a comprehensive but legitimate plan. Instead of simply giving Elena money, he would help Empire Cleaning Services compete for a city contract that would genuinely require Elena's skills and experience for a supervisory role. The rental assistance program would be real and ongoing, helping multiple families while providing cover for specifically helping Eleanor and Grace. Marcus's opportunity to approach Elena came when David's surveillance team confirmed that she always took her dinner break at midnight in a small 24-hour diner near the office building where she worked. At 11:45 p.m., Marcus had his driver take him downtown to wait for her. Elena Rodriguez was smaller than Marcus had expected, her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun, her cleaning uniform impeccably maintained despite its obvious age. Even from a distance, Marcus could see Grace's intelligence and warmth in her grandmother's careful, observant eyes. Marcus approached her table carefully, his wheelchair moving quietly across the diner's smooth floor. "Excuse me, Mrs. Rodriguez. My name is Marcus Sullivan. I wonder if I could speak with you about your granddaughter, Grace." Elena's reaction was immediate and protective. She stood up quickly, her eyes scanning the diner for potential threats. "What about Grace? Is she in trouble? Did something happen at school?" "No, she's not in trouble," Marcus said quickly, his voice gentle and reassuring. "She's a remarkable little girl. Actually, she helped me last night when I was having a difficult evening, and I wanted to talk to you about possibly returning the favor." Elena studied him suspiciously, taking in his expensive clothes, his custom wheelchair, the luxury car visible through the diner's windows. "I don't understand. When did you meet Grace? She was supposed to be home doing homework last night." Marcus had prepared for this question. "She was in the lobby of my office building when I was leaving late. She seemed worried about something, and we talked briefly. She mentioned that you work very hard to take care of her, and I was impressed by how much she loves and respects you." Elena's defensive posture softened slightly. Grace is a good girl. Sometimes too curious for her own good, but she has a kind heart. What did you want to talk about? "Mrs. Rodriguez, I run a consulting company that helps small businesses compete for large government contracts," Marcus said, pulling out legitimate documentation Margaret had prepared. "I understand you work for Empire Cleaning Services. We've been researching the upcoming municipal cleaning contract, and we believe Empire could win it with the right support and management team." Elena stared at the papers he handed her, her eyes widening as she read the details. "I don't understand what this has to do with me." "The contract would require a senior supervisor with extensive experience in commercial cleaning, someone who could manage multiple buildings and oversee other employees," Marcus explained. "From what I've learned about your work record, you're exactly the kind of person they'd need for that position. The salary would be significantly higher than what you're making now, with full benefits and regular daytime hours." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she processed what Marcus was offering. "But why would you help Empire win this contract? What do you get out of it?" "The satisfaction of knowing that hard-working people like you get the recognition and compensation you deserve," Marcus said honestly. "Mrs. Rodriguez, Grace mentioned that you have a friend staying with you who helps with expenses. With this new position, you and Grace could afford your own place. You wouldn't need anyone else's financial help." Elena's face went pale, and Marcus saw understanding dawn in her eyes. "What exactly did Grace tell you about Carlos?" "She told me that he doesn't seem to like her very much, that he makes her feel unwelcome in her own home," Marcus said gently. "She mentioned that he tells her she's too expensive, too noisy, that she asks too many questions." Elena closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, tears were forming. "I've been worried about that. Carlos has been getting more and more irritable, especially with Grace. She tries so hard to be quiet and stay out of his way, but he complains about everything, the space she takes up, the food she eats, even the sound of her doing homework." "Mrs. Rodriguez, Grace is a wonderful child who deserves to feel valued and loved in her own home," Marcus said firmly. "No child should have to walk on eggshells or feel like they're a burden." Elena nodded miserably. I've been trying to save money to get us our own place, but it's impossible on what I make. And Carlos. Lately, he's been saying things about Grace's father, bitter things that make me uncomfortable. I didn't realize until recently that he might have known my son professionally." Marcus felt his suspicions confirmed. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I believe Carlos's presence in your home isn't coincidental. I think he sought you out specifically because of your connection to Grace's father." Elena's face went white. "What do you mean?" "I think Carlos blames your son for something that happened in the past, and he's taking out that resentment on Grace," Marcus said carefully. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you and Grace deserve better than walking on eggshells in your own home." Elena looked at the contract paperwork again, hope battling with disbelief on her weathered face. "When would this job start?" "The bidding process takes about 3 weeks, but I'm confident Empire will win the contract," Marcus said. "In the meantime, I've arranged for a rental assistance program that could help you secure an apartment immediately. The program would cover the security deposit and first few months of rent while you transition to your new position." Elena stared at him in stunned silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't understand why you would do this for people you don't even know." "Because your granddaughter reminded me that helping people is one of the most important things we can do in life," Marcus said honestly. "And because every child deserves to feel safe and valued in their own home." As they finalized the details of Elena's new opportunities, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that came from using his resources to solve a problem that actually mattered. More than that, he felt alive again in a way he hadn't since his accident. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how soon can you and Grace be ready to move to a new apartment?" Marcus asked. "We don't have very many belongings," Elena said thoughtfully. "If you're serious about this rental assistance program, we could be ready by the weekend." "I'm completely serious," Marcus said firmly. "And Mrs. Rodriguez, once you're established in your new job and apartment, the choice of who you want in your life will be entirely yours." Elena's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. "Mr. Sullivan, I don't know how to thank you." "Just give Grace the childhood she deserves," Marcus said simply. "That's all the thanks I need." As Marcus returned to his penthouse that evening, he felt more purposeful than he had in 2 years. Tomorrow, he would finalize the arrangements that would give Grace and Elena the independence they needed. By this weekend, Grace would never again have to feel like she was unwanted or in the way. For the first time since his accident, Marcus was using his wealth and influence for something that truly mattered, ensuring that a remarkable little girl could grow up feeling loved and valued, exactly as she deserved. Saturday morning brought gentle sunshine to Manhattan, the kind of clear, bright day that made the city feel full of possibilities. Marcus sat in his home office, coordinating what he privately thought of as Operation New Beginning, the careful orchestration of Elena's new job opportunity, their new apartment, and most importantly, their independence from Carlos Mendoza. David Chen arrived at 8 a.m. with an update and a satisfied expression. "Marcus, everything is proceeding smoothly. The moving team will be at Elena's building at 10 a.m. and the new apartment is ready. Empire Cleaning Services officially won the municipal contract yesterday, and James Morrison is thrilled to promote Elena to the supervisor position." Marcus felt a wave of satisfaction wash over him. "What about Mendoza? How is he taking the news that Elena and Grace are moving out?" "That's the interesting part," David said, consulting his notes. When Elena told him about her new job and their decision to move, his reaction was more relieved than angry. "Apparently, he's been complaining for weeks about how expensive it is to have a child around, and he seemed almost eager to have the apartment to himself again." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That seems surprisingly easy." I think Mendoza realized that his complaints about Grace were becoming obvious, and Elena was starting to ask uncomfortable questions about his attitude toward the family, David explained. Plus, with Elena getting a much better job, he couldn't argue that she needed his financial help anymore. While David finalized the moving logistics, Marcus received a call from Elena. Her voice was bright with excitement and relief when she answered. "Mr. Sullivan, I can barely believe this is all happening. Grace woke up this morning singing, actually singing, because she's so excited about having her own room in our new apartment. She hasn't been this happy since before Carlos moved in with us." Marcus felt his heart warm at the image of Grace singing with joy. "How is she handling the move?" "Like it's the greatest adventure in the world," Elena laughed. "She's been packing her few belongings very carefully, and she keeps talking about how she's going to be able to ask questions again and talk as much as she wants without bothering anyone." "And how are you feeling about everything?" Marcus asked. Elena's voice grew more serious. "Grateful beyond words, but also guilty. I should have realized sooner how unhappy Carlos was making Grace. I should have put her feelings first, instead of worrying so much about our financial situation." "Elena, you were doing the best you could in an impossible situation," Marcus said firmly. "What matters is that Grace is going to be happy now, and you'll both have the security and independence you deserve." At 2 p.m., Marcus's doorman announced that he had visitors, Elena Rodriguez and Grace. When his elevator doors opened, Grace practically bounced out, her energy and excitement filling the room like sunshine. Her golden hair was shining. She wore a bright yellow dress that actually fit her properly, and most importantly, her blue eyes were sparkling with pure joy. "Mr. Marcus!" Grace exclaimed, running to his wheelchair and throwing her arms around him in an enthusiastic hug. "You should see our new apartment. It's so beautiful, and I have my own room with a window that looks out at a tree, and there's a park across the street where kids play." Eleanor followed with a much calmer but equally radiant demeanor. She wore a simple but elegant dress instead of her cleaning uniform. Her grey hair was styled nicely, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who no longer had to worry about basic survival. "Mr. Sullivan," Eleanor said warmly, "I brought Grace to thank you properly for what you've done for us. But there's also something Grace wanted to share with you, something she discovered while we were packing." Grace nodded seriously, reaching into a small backpack and pulling out a shoebox. "Mr. Marcus, remember how I said Carlos looked familiar, but I couldn't remember where I'd seen him before?" "Yes," Marcus said gently, though he had a feeling he knew where this was going. "Well, when we were packing up our old apartment, I found some old photo albums that belonged to my papa," Grace continued, opening the shoebox to reveal photographs and newspaper clippings. "Look at this picture." She handed Marcus a photograph that showed a group of police officers standing in front of a downtown building. In the center of the group was a young man in a police uniform who clearly resembled Grace, her father, Officer Carlos Rodriguez. But what caught Marcus's attention was a figure in a security guard uniform standing in the background of the photo. "That's Carlos Mendoza," Grace said, pointing to the background figure. "He was working security at the building where my papa was doing his investigation. That's why he looked familiar to me." Elena's voice was heavy with understanding as she picked up the story. "When I saw that photograph, everything started making sense. Carlos never told me he'd known my son professionally. All this time I thought it was just a coincidence that he came to us for help after losing his job." Marcus studied the photograph, seeing the full picture clearly now. "Grace, do you understand what this means?" "I think so," Grace said thoughtfully. "Carlos was angry at Papa for doing his job as a policeman, and when Papa died, Carlos was still angry. So when he needed a place to live, he came to us, and he was mean to me because I reminded him of Papa. The maturity of Grace's understanding impressed Marcus, but it also saddened him that such a young child had to process such adult complexities. "Grace, your father was a hero who was just trying to keep people safe. Carlos was wrong to blame him for doing the right thing, and he was especially wrong to take those feelings out on you." Grace nodded solemnly. Abuela explained that sometimes when people lose their jobs because they weren't doing the right thing, they get angry at the people who were doing the right thing instead of being angry at themselves. Elena smiled proudly at her granddaughter. "Grace is very wise for her age. We talked a lot about this during the move, about how some people prefer to blame others for their problems instead of taking responsibility for their own choices." Marcus felt a deep admiration for both Elena and Grace. They had taken a potentially traumatic situation and turned it into a learning experience about responsibility, choices, and the importance of doing what's right even when it's difficult. "Mr. Marcus," Grace said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything," Marcus replied. "That night in the restaurant, when you made your birthday wish, what did you wish for?" Marcus smiled, remembering the moment when Grace had pushed the cake toward him and insisted that wishes were the most important part of any birthday celebration. "I wished for the wisdom to see the gifts that remained in my life and the courage to build something meaningful from where I was." "And did your wish come true?" Grace asked with the serious curiosity that characterized all her questions. Marcus looked at this remarkable child who had appeared in his darkest moment and transformed his entire perspective on what his life could still become. "Yes, Grace. My wish came true in ways I never could have imagined." Elena cleared her throat softly. "Mr. Sullivan, Grace and I discussed this before coming here today. We know you've already done more for us than we could ever repay, but we wanted to ask you something." "What's that?" "We wondered if you might like to have dinner with us tomorrow night," Elena said with a warm smile. "Nothing fancy, just home-cooked food and conversation. Grace wants to show you her new room, and I want to cook you the best meal you've ever had. It seems like you might need family as much as we needed a fresh start." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. These two remarkable women were offering him the one thing his money couldn't buy: genuine human connection, the kind of belonging that came from being valued for who you were rather than what you could provide. "I would be honored," Marcus said, his voice thick with feeling. Grace clapped her hands together with delight. "And Mr. Marcus, now that I don't have to be quiet all the time, I can teach you all sorts of things, like how to make paper airplanes, and how to tell jokes, and how to have real family dinners where everyone talks and laughs together." "That sounds wonderful," Marcus said, laughing at her enthusiasm. "I think I have a lot to learn about being part of a family." "Don't worry," Grace said, with the confidence of someone who had rediscovered her own voice. "I'm really good at talking now that I'm allowed to again. We're going to have so much fun together." Udril. As Marcus watched Grace and Elena prepare to leave, he realized that his birthday wish had indeed come true, but not in the way he'd expected. He'd thought he was looking for personal peace and acceptance of his limitations. Instead, he'd found something much more valuable. He'd discovered that his true power had never been his ability to walk, or even his business acumen. His real strength lay in his capacity to use his resources to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Looking out at the sunny city beyond his windows, Marcus no longer saw a world that had moved on without him. Instead, he saw a place full of opportunities to help, to connect, to make life better for people who needed it most. He saw a future where a man in a wheelchair could still be someone's hero, where families could be chosen as well as born, where second chances were always possible. Tomorrow he would have dinner with his new family, a grandmother who had shown him the meaning of resilience, and a 7-year-old girl who had taught him that the most important conversations often began with the simplest questions. Next week, he would start a foundation dedicated to helping families in transition, ensuring that other children like Grace could grow up feeling valued and loved. Next month, he would begin the most meaningful work of his life. His accident had taken away the life he'd planned, but Grace had shown him how to build something even better from the pieces that remained. She had asked him a simple question that night in the restaurant. "Can I sit with you?" And in doing so, she had saved them both. The rain from earlier in the week had given way to sunshine, and in Marcus's heart it felt like the beginning of spring after a very long winter. He had learned that sometimes the most profound gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages, and that the question that changes everything might be as simple as a child asking if she can sit with you. As he prepared for tomorrow's dinner with his new family, Marcus smiled, knowing that the best chapters of his life were just beginning.